let's now kind of switch gears and talk about the other team that we want to talk about this week, the New Orleans Pelicans. The red hot New Orleans Pelicans. They started the season 12-11 and have since gone 30-15. 30-15 since starting the season 12-11. So not only are they red hot recently, just really beating really good teams substantially, but they also have been on a 55 win pace, since 45 games ago. It really all coincides with the end of the in-season tournament. So that's when they were at the 12-11 point, kind of the lowest point of their season, really. And then they just has taken off and have been really good all the way since. It's like, I've been a person who's been like, I'm not sure about the Pelicans. Are they legit? Are they not? What's going on? Zion's up and down. But they've been good through and through. They've been good all the way through the season since the in-season tournament ended. So where do you want to start with talking about the Pelicans? There's a few things that I want to bring up, but you want to kick us off with some New Orleans Pelicans talk.
Yeah, to me, I mean, you and I are just such macro thinkers, and I can't think about the Pelicans without thinking about the viability of Ingram and Zion. To me, that's just the cloud hovering over them until they make a decision and go in a direction. And I still don't think they're fully committed to a direction. Like, I think they're just trying to accumulate as many good players as they can right now, which is fine. But I have to assume that the goal is to eventually win a championship with Zion Williamson on the team. Like, when you get a generational player number one in the lottery, unless Zion has said to them, like, yeah, I don't think I'm here long term, and that's the reason they're holding on to Ingram. Like, that, to me, there are two reasons to hold on to Brandon Ingram. One, you don't think Zion is going to be there long term, and you want somebody to build around when Zion's gone. Or two, you think that you can make Brandon Ingram work with Zion Williamson. So the viability of the two of them sharing the court together is everything to me. And to be honest, aside from Ingram not shooting more threes, he's being assisted on the fewest percentage of his threes this season in his entire career, which means he's shooting off the catch less despite Zion basically being healthy. That's no good. That is a comment on the interactivity or the lack of interactivity between those two players, because Zion carries a high usage. He does a lot of creating. I'm sure he gets plenty of hockey assists to Brandon Ingram. But Ingram just needs to shoot off the catch more. He's proven he can do it. I don't get why he's so hesitant to do it, or relatively hesitant. He's shooting less than 5 threes per 75 off the catch. That number was almost 8 in Zion's first 2 seasons in New Orleans. And I know Zion spent a lot of that time hurt, but he's proven he can do it. He shot almost 40% both of those seasons. If you shoot almost 40% from 3 and you're shooting almost 8 threes per 75, there's no reason that should go down as one, you hit the prime of your career, 2, the league evolves, and 3, Zion plays more. You have a high usage creator playing more. You should be shooting off the catch more. Put that aside and assume for whatever reason Brandon Ingram just doesn't want to do that. I've actually been encouraged by some of the signs that I've seen of from Zion and Ingram in terms of the additive nature of their impact, their ability to raise the team's ceiling by providing impact that isn't purely what they can do with the ball in their hands. And I think most of that is coming on the defensive end from both players. Both are above the 70th percentile in defensive EPM. And you watch the tape, because of the nature, because Zion is on the team, Brandon Ingram a lot of times gets slotted on the opposing team's best wing. And he's done a surprisingly admirable job a lot recently. I think that's a big part of the team's defense. They're 3rd in overall defensive rating since February 1st. So their defense has been elite recently. And I think Brandon Ingram's effort on the ball has been a huge part of that. I think we all always knew that Ingram had some level of rim protection in him just because of his crazy length, and like he's going to be a good rim protector. But him trying as maybe not like a primary wing defender, because we know they have Herb Jones, who's wonderful, and they have Trey Murphy, who, he's not Herb Jones, but he's the guy that they put on those guys when he's on the court. But still, Ingram is, they played the Clippers a few nights ago. He got Paul George, and you got Kawhi. And when he was matched up on those guys, I thought he did a good job. And then you have Zion, who, I mean, how much have people talked about his weight, his effort? And all of a sudden, you watch Pelicans games, and he's locked in both on and off the ball as much as he can be. If neither Ingram nor Zion are going to provide additive impact off the ball on offense, the highest ceiling for this team involves those two playing high level defense. And I've seen traces of that these last few weeks.
Yeah, I think those are all great points. Great place to start with Zion, like the kind of synergy between Zion and Ingram. And I didn't realize the stat that you mentioned, which is that how high a percentage of Ingram's shots are coming off the dribble as opposed to off the catch. That's really, I did not realize that was the case. I think that, to be fair, they asked Ingram to do a lot of creation, which is interesting. I mean, obviously CJ is like kind of their point guard, and Alvarado is really the token backup, but neither of those guys are like true point guards in a sense. And I don't mean that to be disparaging. I think both of those guys are great, and CJ's been awesome this year. But those guys are not as likely to like kind of set up their teammates and put them in really specifically great spots to be able to cash in and finish plays. They're a little bit more.
You're basically talking about like specifically forcing collapses and creating advantages. And
yes,
like
exactly.
McCollum isn't like a Brunson type in that sense. He's not forcing doubles, triples. You can't picture a world where anyone but Zion is bending the defense enough to the point where Ingram can just spot up and shoot a bunch of threes. I just want to back up what I'm saying with the stats before I turn it back over to you.
Yeah.
In Zion's first season, 89% of Ingram's threes were assisted, which isn't even that high. But that season, it was in the 39th percentile. So it's not like he was like always shooting off the catch. He was still self-creating plenty. 89% of Ingram's threes came off the catch or were assisted. He attempted 6.3 threes per 75 possessions, and he shot 39% from three. So think about that. 89% assisted. He shot 6.3 threes per 75, and he shot 39% on those threes. This season, 77% of his threes are assisted. Over 10% fewer of his threes are assisted. He's only shooting 4.2 threes per 75. Ghastly. That's 2 threes less than he was 4 seasons ago. And he's only shooting 36% this season. All those numbers are down. Like, if you have Zion Williamson on your team, I'm sorry, that's just not a tenable offensive solution.
Yeah, and like I said, I totally agree, and I think that's a great point. I'm glad you added the additional kind of data to support that. I will say, like, again, I do think they're asking Ingram to kind of create for himself a lot more. I'm not sure why. Again, I think because I wouldn't say they're an isolation heavy offense, but in some ways they can be isolation heavy. And to the extent that CJ creates for himself, Ingram creates for himself, Zion creates for himself. I will say the reason why it was primarily surprising to me, the amount or the percentage of shots that Ingram is shooting off the dribble as opposed to off the catch, is because Zion right now has his career high for assist percentage. He's in like the 87th percentile in assist percentage right now. So Zion is moving the ball a lot more than we have seen at other times in the past for him. And it's by far the highest assist percentage for him. I was looking up also some of the numbers because I've been watching a ton of Pelicans lately. They're really fun to watch, especially defensively, and we'll turn to that next. But I was looking up some of the Zion and Ingram data points as far as like how they perform when they're on the court. And it's really interesting. When Ingram and Zion are both on, this is over 2,100 possessions. The Pelicans are a plus 3.1 per 100. With Ingram on and Zion off, this is over 1,900 possessions. The Pelicans are a plus 7.5 per 100. So that's a meaningful difference over a really substantial number of possessions. Of course, Ingram on without Zion is primarily against bench units, but it's still an interesting note, especially because Zion's missed a bunch of games, as we would expect. Not a ton. I think he's missed 10 or 11 games. And in those games, I'm sure Ingram is playing against starting lineups. But at the same time, it's just that's a substantial difference. It's definitely something to note to me. And I do feel like
you should do the inverse too. Sorry to step on you again, but because I think it highlights something that's important about this Pelicans team. We always talk about So sometimes we talk about teams with depth, like we talk about the Knicks, they have really good depth. The Pelicans with Zion on the court and Ingram off it are plus 3.5 per 100. And so to me, this says go for it, XJ.
Oh, I was gonna say, yeah, that's actually exactly where I was gonna go next. But so the data that I'm pulling is no, you're good. The data that I'm pulling is from Cleaning the Glass, so it takes out garbage time or filters out what they consider garbage time. And so the data that I have is Zion on, Ingram off over 1,400 possessions is plus 1.8. So 1.8 per 100. So there's a little bit of difference there in the data, but regardless, the best performing version of the Pelicans in terms of between Zion and Ingram, Zion on or Ingram on and either one of them off, the best performing version of the Pelicans is with Ingram on and with Zion off, and by a substantial margin, all over at least 1,400 possessions we're talking about. But yeah, please jump in from there.
No, my only point was going to be if they're performing well across all these minutes, to me, that just says they have a good deep roster that is versatile enough to surround these guys separately when they want one of them to sit, but then they also can throw a number of different combinations around the two of them to try to maximize them. I don't know if I'm a Western Conference team, I don't know if I want to see the Pelicans in the playoffs. A team with this much, especially with a coach like Willie Green, who has showed the willingness to emphasize the team's versatility. Jonas Valanciunas played 18 minutes last night. And I know neither one of us are huge Jonas guys. And I'm sure in the back of your mind, you're like, well, I mean, when Jonas is on the court, they're not going to have enough space. I'd agree with you. But if Willie Green is willing to say, hey, look, you're getting exploited, you're just not going to play. Like you're not going to be out there for big minutes. We're going to try and go somewhere else. When you have the player versatility that a guy like Herb Jones, a guy like Trey Murphy, that they allow for you, there are just so many different combinations of lineups with both Zion and Ingram, or with just one of them on the court, that I think that's what the data more than anything is telling us, that this is just a good team almost regardless who's on the court.
Yeah, I largely agree with that. I do think there's a substantive difference between Ingram being on and Zion off, and Zion being on and Ingram off. How much of that is due to kind of the earlier season performance from Zion? It could be a large part that. But again, I've been watching a lot of Pelicans recently as opposed to earlier in the season, and recently they've been amazing, and Zion has been amazing. He's been much better since the first few games. He has been up and down a little bit. I don't know what to make of the reporting that he lost 25 pounds since November, but recently, coinciding with what I've seen, he's starting to look closer to the Zion that we saw back in 2021. When he has space, he's literally not unstoppable. I watch Pelicans games and I'm just like, how does he not score every time he touches the basketball? I don't get it. His touch around the hoop is ridiculous. His ability to just bully his way to the rim, and he just closes space. If you give him any space, he just closes it and moves through you. I just actually don't understand how teams are stopping Zion. Is it just that he misses? Because I've watched at least 5 Pelicans games in the past couple weeks, and Zion's just not stoppable. I really don't get it, especially when he has space around him and you can't bring help. If he has you one-on-one in the post, no matter who you are, you're done.
Second time this show, I'm going to say something potentially blasphemous. I don't think I've ever seen anything like Zion Williamson's ability to get to the basket, and I'm including prime LeBron James. Obviously, what was when we talked about Zion the first time this season, we said Zion's basically LeBron if you took away the defense shooting and the processing. And you were like, and you said, but you were like, you didn't want to piss off Pelicans fans, and you were like, let's be clear, that's still an all-star. That's still an amazing player.
Yeah.
It's still an amazing player, and that's just it. And you see the rest of his game. I mentioned his defense earlier. Look, he's not. If he becomes LeBron James as a defender, I'll eat this blanket that's on top of me right now. He's just not going to be LeBron as a defender. I don't think that's an insult to Zion, but the defense has gotten better. He's becoming a better processor as a passer. He's making more. He's not just putting his head down and trying to score every single time. He is trying to make the right plays. And I do think that as long as he isn't going to be much of a shooter, it's the thing you talked about with Amen Thompson a few weeks ago. How do you mitigate a player who doesn't want to shoot threes being on the court? You just put the ball in his hands, because there's no one, you can't cheat off him if the ball's in his hands, especially someone like Zion. You can't give him a head of steam. So that's how the Pelicans mitigate the spacing concerns when Zion's on the court. And he's so good getting downhill. He's such a powerful force. He has so much athleticism. Like you said, he has so much touch around the rim. You have to send help, and he's starting to make more and more of the right reads.
Exactly. Yep.
I've never seen anything like it. I don't know. I mean, I was watching the Clippers game with my dad. It's not even just at the top of the key. He had a baseline take where the guy multiple times cut off the baseline and did the thing that all announcers say, use the baseline as another teammate. And it seemed like Zion didn't have a path to the basket, and he just turned on his shoulder and went the other way. And before we know it, he had a reverse layup. And it was just like, the guy's amazing.
The craziest thing to me, even more somehow than his ability to bully his way to the rim, no matter who the defender is, like it literally doesn't matter, is his touch. His touch with either hand is crazy. Like, he has amazing touch. It's almost like his training as a basketball player coming up was literally just like mic and drills. Like, all he did was mic and drill for like hours and hours every day, because he is able to finish off the glass, high off the glass, floaters, either hand, straight into the hoop or off the glass. Like, it's really incredible. But what I really love, honestly, is when Trey Murphy's on the court with him. When they surround him with that level of spacing and you can't help off, and Trey Murphy's the guy who's going to put up threes. I think he's close to like 10 threes per 75. He's going to put up threes and he's going to jack them up. And so when he's on the court with Zion, I love Herb Jones, Zion, and Trey Murphy together. I think that's just like, I don't know how you guard that trio. I really don't know how you stop them.
Can I can. I'm going to bring up the thing I brought up earlier this season with you, because I'm curious. I'm not going to say you were against it, but you were skeptical of its viability on the defensive end. Do you think that we end up seeing any Zion, Ingram, McCollum, Trey, Herb? Because that to me that by far has the highest ceiling of any lineup that they can throw out together.
Yeah, I still don't agree. So I think we see it in spots, but I don't think it's like viable long term to have like essentially Zion as your token center. I don't. So how I think it would work is if you had, obviously this is silly to say because anybody would want to have this player. If you had a Chet Holmgren, who is actually like a 5 who protects the rim and also spaces. Even a Miles Turner, you put a Miles Turner out there.
I just love that analysis. Like, I love when we're like, who this would work for? Like, if they just had LeBron, like that'd be.
Hey, that's why freaking Chet Holmgren is one of the most valuable players in the NBA. But I will say, I don't know how viable it is. Zion has played at the 5, for a small number of possessions this year. I think it's under 500. In that time, their defense has been really, really good. Again, of course, it's a very small sample, so I wouldn't say that means their defense would be good in that situation. Their offense hasn't been good. Again, really small sample. I wouldn't say their offense hasn't been good, but we would expect Zion at the 5 for their offense to be great and their defense to be lacking. We're seeing the opposite right now. The effective field goal percentage when Zion is on the court at the 5 is 52%, which would be 14th percentile in the NBA. The most alarming thing about Zion at the 5 is in those few possessions, under 500 possessions, 21% offensive rebound rate, which would be 3rd percentile. What is this? A 36% offensive rebound rate for the opponents, which is a 64% defensive rebound rate, which is the 0th percentile in the NBA. That is a concern if you're like in those few possessions, the Pelicans essentially get no rebounds. Like I just want to say, how many possessions has he played at the 5?
Again,
under 500, so 487.
So I just want to say, I would never play him at the 5 except for that lineup. Okay. That's probably combining a bunch of lineups that I don't think have any viability. Yes, the only reason I think that specific lineup has merit is because it's their 5 best players. Like, I think it's their 5 best players by far almost. Like, and
you're right.
At a certain point, you just want to see what your 5 best players can do together.
Yeah.
And look, I mean, they've played 34 minutes together, and it's more of what you're talking about. They have an 87 offensive rating in those 34 minutes and a 109 defensive rating.
It's just not enough minutes for it to matter. Like it just
nothing. It doesn't mean anything.
It's like
I wasn't trying to make the point that it matters. I was just trying to say
I'm supporting your point. Yeah.
Yeah, but it does go along with what you were saying, that the offense remains bad, which I would not expect to see. I just hope that Willie Green keeps it. I don't think it should be like the starting lineup. I don't think that, for the reasons that you stated. But I do think that for stretches and maybe to close certain games and certain matchups, you just need Zion with the most possible space.
Yeah, I totally hear that. I think for stretches, it's something you can whip out in certain situations against certain lineups. I can imagine them doing it against the aforementioned Oklahoma City Thunder. Like, I could imagine if they were in a series with the Thunder, you could whip that out in certain situations and just space them out as well. So I think it could work. It could work as a useful tool, but I'm just saying, I didn't think at the time, I didn't think it was viable as like long term. And I just still don't think that's viable long term, unless you have this perfect rim protecting spacing big that is, rare now and will be commonplace in 10 years.
You know who would have been helpful to them? OG Anunoby.
OG Anunoby would be helpful to literally any team in the entire league.
Every single team. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think they were interested in him too. I mean, I'm sure every team was interested in him, but
I did. Yeah, there were rumors that they were interested in OG. But they have their own OG in Herb Jones, who's been ridiculous.
But Herb Jones and OG together.
Yeah, I mean,
how do you score? Herb Jones is amazing. We talked about that block he had on Paul George that turned into a dunk is like one of the coolest things I've seen in a basketball game this season. He's so unique. He has this crazy length that he can use in passing lanes. He gets steals in passing lanes that he has no business getting. But then he's like a pest on the ball. He's weirdly good at navigating screens for someone his size. It's very rare you see. Like even OG is really good at a number of things. I think Herb is already a better screen navigator than OG is. He's really good at going over the screen and then using his length to affect. Like, you can be a ball handler, snake around a screen, think you have a step on Herb Jones, and Herb Jones will use his wingspan to contest the shot from angles that you didn't know were possible. He's just been really good this season, and he's shooting 43% from 3 on what? How many? I think he's shooting high volume too, right? Decently high volume.
Herb,
not
yeah,
like
he's not shooting crazy high volume.
4.4 attempts per 75. Still fine. Look, he's a good player no matter what. You can't defend that well and not be a good player. How impactful he is entirely defined by how realistic this shooting is. I don't think the Pelicans need him to shoot 43% from 3, but they need him to shoot when he's open, and they need it to be an efficient shot. They need it to be in the 35 to 40% range for if he's going to be a long-term sustainable piece. At the beginning of the season, I thought Trey Murphy was their most important young player. I think the shooting is I think he has such a high ceiling as a shooter. I thought the rest would come along. I think you can put Herb Jones in the discussion with Trey Jones, and maybe even put Herb Jones in the discussion with Trey Murphy. And look, I know he's older, but I think you could maybe even put Herb Jones ahead of Trey Murphy.
Those are two of the most valuable young wings in the league, just because of what they could do on either end of the court. And, from a Herb Jones perspective, his ability defensively is pretty much unparalleled. I mean, we're making the OG comparison. Once you start comparing wing defenders to OG Anunoby and being like, I don't know, he's better at this, it's like, okay, that's a ridiculously valuable player. And then Trey Murphy on his end, in terms of his size, his length, his ability to space, his willingness to space, his willingness to shoot, he will shoot the ball. He doesn't care. I think that's such an undervalued trait. And the fact that he's grown, came in the league shooting, 7.5 threes per 75, 7.5 is his second year. And then now is up to 10. I mean, there's a ton of value in just his ability to shoot at a high volume and still hit threes like at an insane clip. So I agree with you. I don't know who's more valuable. I'd probably go with Herb potentially, just banking on his ability to make shots, to actually be able to be a good 3-point shooter and just coax him into shooting it more. But his defensive ceiling is just absurd. So that's probably why I would have him ahead, but they're neck and neck.
And two numbers about Trey and Murphy jump out to me, and they actually correlate really strongly. His percentage of threes that are assisted on is down from 97 as a rookie to 91%. So he was one of the most, or he was at least in the upper echelon of players being assisted on their threes, which is obvious for a rookie. That makes, you're 21-year-old, you're not going to be self-creating threes super often. He's doing a little bit more off the bounce this season. And he's in the 98th percentile of efficiency at the rim over decent volume. Those are signs that he's making improvements that maybe the masses aren't paying attention to insofar as what he can do with the ball in his hands. Because look, CJ McCollum's a good player. I can't imagine the Pelicans are like, yeah, we want McCollum here for 5 more years with this Ingram and Zion core. I think McCollum is, maybe this won't be his last season, but I'd imagine they are reaching the end of the McCollum era in New Orleans. He's 33 years old, I think. 33. So yeah, I mean, can Trey Murphy be a guy who can take on some initiation usage and do that? That would certainly make the conversation more interesting, because I don't think he has the defensive ceiling that Herb Jones has. And while he does shoot more threes, if Herb Jones is going to, I mean, what's more valuable? A guy shooting, 5 threes per 75 and shooting 45%, or a guy who chucks no matter what and is more in the 36 to 37% range? I think that's at least a discussion worth having. And my point
It's arguable.
is
that,
yeah. If that's debatable and the defense isn't debatable, it's tough to put Trey Murphy ahead of Herb Jones unless he finds another way to impact the game. And these numbers are, some trends that he's figured out an off the bounce game that could be valuable to the Pelicans, both in the playoffs and long term.
Yeah, I love how you frame that. And I think it's also just true that he's become better off the bounce and become better as a playmaker. His assist percentage has shot up almost double. It was 6.3% last year, 6.5% the year before, 10.4% this year. The weird thing about it, though, his turnovers have not. His turnovers had not shot up along with his playmaking. He is in the 99th percentile in not turning the ball over. That is absurd to put together with his shooting, his finishing at the rim on low volume, which is probably a lot of dunks and layups. But that's a valuable package that we're talking about. And he wasn't good earlier in the season. Trey Murphy wasn't that good earlier in the season. He's come on of late and has really upped basically all of those statistics over the past couple of months. So I think that's incredible. The big thing that, if I could shift gears, or do you want to have the last word?
I just wanted to add context to the stats because you made such a good point. I actually can't believe, because those are both also they correlate perfectly with the point I was making. Trey Murphy as a rookie had a 6.5 assist percentage. That was in the 16th percentile. To XJ's point, it's almost double. It's 10.4 in the 41st percentile. He's almost league average in assist percentage. Okay, so you see a 23-year-old assist a guy who's not a natural creator. He's not a point guard. His assist percentage almost doubles, and then his turnover percentage goes from 6.7% last season, which was already elite in the 94th percentile. It's 4.1% this season.
He literally just doesn't turn the ball over. Yeah.
He doesn't turn the ball over ever. That's amazing. That's such an amazing trend for Trey Murphy as a player and his overall impact.
Yep, I totally agree. And I think that, again, I do think that he is being slept on a little bit because he had such a poor start. Obviously, he was injured for the vast majority of the beginning of the regular season, then had kind of a shaky start up and down. And now he's just been really good and really steady, which is coinciding with a lot of the Pelicans kind of run here. Big thing I wanted to talk about coming into this conversation with you, Geoff, which is right up our alley. We are Hot Hand Theory here. We talk a lot about data and trends and trying to understand and parse through what the data means. This is a big one. The Pelicans defense has been awesome all season. one of the best defenses lately. You mentioned they're either top 3 or top 5 in defensive rating this year in 2024. Top 10 defense all season long. The big debate for the Pelicans is their 3-point shooting defense. How much of it is real? How much of it is something they're doing versus how much of it is luck? I'm going to tell you some stats, Geoff, and I just want to get your response to these. New Orleans gives up 21 wide open threes per game, which is second most in the NBA. Opponents shoot only 36.6% on those wide open threes, which is the worst shooting percentage on wide open looks in the NBA. Again, I said they give up the second most wide open looks from 3 in the NBA, and opponents shoot the worst percentage on wide open looks in the NBA. That is incredible to think about. I'm going to add more. They also give up 14.5 open threes, which is defined as the closest defender within 4 to 6 feet, which is third in the NBA. Third most open threes in the NBA. Opponents shoot 33.7% on those open threes, which is 8th worst shooting percentage in the NBA. Seems like an obvious candidate for 3-point shooting luck. If this was the only data points that we had, I would very strongly conclude this is 3-point shooting luck. They're giving up a bunch of wide open threes. Teams aren't making them. There's no way this is sustainable. This will come back to hurt them at some point. The thing is, they were 6th in wide open threes given up per game last year. And teams also shot the second worst shooting percentage in the NBA on those looks. And similarly, they were the 3rd worst percentage. Opponents were the 3rd worst shooting percentage on open threes against them last year. 2 years in a row. 2 years in a row of the same thing. I don't know. Is this luck, or is this something? Is there something that defenses? Let's forget about the Pelicans for a second specifically. Is there even something hypothetically that defenses can be doing to consistently cause teams to shoot significantly worse on wide open threes? The things I can think of are these are late clock threes, a lot of them, and they're teams are under a lot of pressure when they're shooting them, or they're extremely precise about letting poor shooters shoot threes. So these are threes from bad shooters they're leaving open. To be doing that to this extent, to where they're giving up again 21 wide open threes in the per game, and opponents only shooting less than 37% on those threes, like I don't know. It's so hard for me to imagine. But what do you think about that in terms of their 3-point defense? If anything, what could they be doing to be causing teams to shoot this poorly on wide open threes?
My guess is, like most things, the answer lies somewhere in the middle. And negative or positive regression is coming. Like, teams are just going to make more threes. That just happens. But there are ways for teams to give up more or better open threes than others. It doesn't just exist in a pure vacuum. And I think you nailed both ways you can do that. If you work really hard for a defensive possession, and finally at the end of the shot clock, it's just like, the offense gets tired too when you work really hard to try to create a shot. And that's not the same as, wide open three, start of a possession, you're just standing there. If you have to move around a lot, it's a little bit different. But the key factor is if you can precisely hone in on who the right guys are to give up open threes on, that's the way that you manufacture a way for it to seem like you're running good or you're getting lucky when actually you're doing something skillful.
Is there something to the idea that because, we talked about a bunch of the Pelicans' wings already, because they're so long, they're so athletic, they get around, they get in rotations, they switch a ton, which I really love their switching defense when they just switch Ingram and Zion and Herb and Ingram and Murphy and Ingram. Like, I love when they just start switching everything. Is there something to the idea that these guys are so long and athletic and they're flying around the court that your open three or your wide open three doesn't feel as open because you're like, they can still probably get there. I have to kind of hurry and hit this shot. Is there something to that as well?
Oh, for sure. What is, I think length has more inherent value than sometimes we even realize as people watching on the couch. It's, again, this all doesn't exist in a vacuum. You're not just always shooting the same shots. And if someone like Herb Jones is in the vicinity, there's definitely going to be something in the back of shooters' minds that, oh, I got to get this off a little bit quicker. Little tiny details that can affect the margins of efficiency. I mean, we're seeing an extreme case of this in San Antonio. Wemby is just basically a one-man defense over there. And a huge part of it, he's not some dude who's just out there jumping at every shot. A huge part of it is the threat of him being in the vicinity. When the Pelicans can roll out entire lineups of these types of guys who are operating on a string and working really hard, I don't think it's too far-fetched to say that opponents' efficiencies are going to be impacted by the mere presence of all that length on the court.
Yeah, I think that's valid. All of that I think is totally valid. It's just, to me, from a real, just true data perspective, it seems unlikely that all of that combines to create this sort of dynamic where they're giving up the most by far wide open threes in the league, and also teams are shooting the worst or the second most, and also teams are shooting the worst on those wide open threes. Like, I couldn't imagine that. And like you said, it's probably somewhere in the middle. It's a combination of things that they're doing and a combination of luck. I do think in terms of their playoff matchups right now, I think they're slated to go up against the Clippers. I think the Clippers are a really good matchup in terms of what the Pelicans would want to see. And I feel like if they play the Clippers, we could see an upset there. I really do. I think that they have the wings to deal with the Clippers' wings and James Harden as well. And I just feel like they could potentially punish that team on the inside as well. I know Zubac is a pretty good rim protector, but I just think that they have the right pieces to go up against the Clippers.
I kind of want to take it a step further.
Please take it a step further. I love that. I want to hear it.
I don't know if there's a team in the West that has a better chance against the Nuggets than the Pelicans do.
Whoa.
And that's OKC, who's amazing.
Whoa.
I think
OKC is a rough match. I mean, the Nuggets are a rough matchup for OKC, I think.
Yeah. I mean, the Nuggets' best defender, in my opinion, is Caldwell Pope. I think he is
on
vital
ball by far.
Everything.
Yeah.
And I just want to laugh again at the Lakers trading him for Russell Westbrook.
Not just him. Say the whole trade.
Yeah. And Kuzma. And then they couldn't re-sign Caruso because they traded for Russ. That has to be the worst trade in NBA history.
In terms of ramifications, like one of them for sure.
Yeah.
Because the trade is just straight up KCP and Kuzma for Westbrook. You know, it's like, that's bad. But then you add the fact that you couldn't keep Caruso as a result, then it becomes like untenable.
They would have won at least another championship if they just held on to that core. I feel very strongly about that. Anyways, I just feel like when you have Ingram and Zion, okay, so Aaron Gordon has to guard one of them. What do you do? Like, again, I'm not saying the Nuggets are going to lose. I think the Nuggets are the best team in the West. I would pick them to come out of the West. But I think the Pelicans are uniquely equipped to do. I mean, look, I was talking earlier about how neither of us are super high on Jonas. If there was one situation where I was like, all right, Jonas, we're going to throw you out there. If Jokic can't overpower you, like he can, I'm not saying anybody can stop Jokic. Relative to stopping Jokic, the Pelicans have somewhat of an answer. They have someone they can try, to match his minutes with. They have two amazing offensive players that the Nuggets really only have one answer for. I know Peyton Watson's been amazing.
That's what I was going to say. I said, don't sleep on Peyton Watson's impact there.
They're not just going to bench Michael Porter Jr. Like, that doesn't happen.
Yeah, I'm just saying to your point, I hear your point totally. I really do. I do think the Nuggets have a bunch of wings that they could throw out there. I think Porter Jr. can potentially hold up against Ingram. I don't think it's just going to be like Ingram's going to just roast him completely. And if he does, it's going to be from the mid range, which is with how good the Nuggets offense is, you could probably live with that. And then you have Peyton Watson up your sleeve where you can throw out and deploy if you need to. So I don't know. I just don't think it's cut and dry that like they couldn't contend with the Pelicans' wings is what I would say.
Yeah, they could contend, but again, we're speaking relative to beating the Nuggets. Like
Relative to the league, yeah, to the West,
yeah,
yes,
I
yeah.
think the Pelicans have a unique combination of players, and I just really like what Willie Green does over there. I like his willingness to experiment. I think guys play for him. And I think that if the Pelicans get through the Clippers, and look, I'm not just going to skip ahead. The Clippers are really good, have 3 really good players. That's going to be a tough matchup. I don't know. The Pelicans, I think they could give the Nuggets a hard time in that second round series if that's the 4-1.
Yeah, I don't really have too much pushback other than I think that, I wouldn't be, to me, it's like you have Aaron Gordon as the Zion, I'm not going to say stopper, but you have the Zion defender. And that is what kind of balances out that matchup for me, and where I don't think it's like, man, the Pelicans could really have their number there. But at the same time, relative to what the other teams in the West have to offer, I do think that they're pretty much up there with anybody else. So I could totally see the Pelicans giving the Nuggets the biggest run for their money. And I think that the Pelicans match up well against a lot of teams in the West. I think they may struggle with OKC. I think OKC has the shooting to hurt them, has the spacing to hurt them. Situations where maybe you can't play Valanciunas, maybe you have to go to a ton of Larry Nance, and Larry Nance has been really good, so it may not be the worst option. But I just think that OKC is gonna really, if we're gonna do this thing where we're giving up wide open threes, I don't know that that's gonna work out if that's the case. So it'll be really interesting.
They would just give them up to Aaron Gordon.
No. Oh, I was talking about against OKC specifically.
Yeah. Well, that's different though, and I don't. What does that matter? I don't. I think
I was talking about a different matchup, just a different matchup entirely.
Oh, okay, yeah. I think OKC is a really bad matchup for New Orleans for
that's
for
exactly
that
what I was
reason
saying. Yeah. Yeah.
Although I do think Zion would have a monster series against OKC.
he would absolutely have a monster series, but we know OKC is like willing to very patient and understanding of the trade-offs. They're not overreactive to any one specific thing. They're not like, we're getting crushed on the boards, we're getting crushed on the interior, we must do something, hit the panic button. They're like, okay, you're getting yours, and we're going to do what we do, and then it's going to, on the net, this is going to go in our favor. And so I totally agree. I think Zion would crush in that series, but they would have more difficulty stopping OKC than they would against most other teams. So I think that's the toughest matchup for them in the West, to me, in my opinion.
Yeah, for sure. And I just wanted to add on to that. I'm so sympathetic to that quote from OKC's coach about winning the net and about how everything is imperfect. So you do the best you can, and you're looking for the biggest gains, because I mean, honestly, that's how I view life. That's my philosophy on most of life, is that utopia just doesn't exist, and try as you may, you just sort of have to do the best you can with the hand you were dealt. Not only just as an individual, but if in a society or at a job, anything. And I love that his view on OKC, when people are like, well, you guys are getting crushed on the glass, what are you going to do about that? And it's like, okay, well, if we make a trade-off to try to win the defensive rebounding battle, we might be sacrificing something else that costs us to win in the net less, and so his view is, yes, we're going to get hurt on the defensive glass against certain opponents, but as long as the other gains that come out of it from playing small and having Chet at center are big enough, we can make it work. And I just thought that was a really cool quote.
Yeah, and I think super highly of Dagnall, and I totally agree with that quote. And I think that that's just like how you have to approach these games. And as it relates to New Orleans, I mean, they don't have many weaknesses besides that they give up a lot of threes, and maybe that's by design. And so I think that we'll just have to see when we really drill in on a New Orleans Pelicans playoff series. We'll see how that goes. If that hurts them, if they're leaving the right guys open, if they maybe give up fewer open threes, depending on who the matchup is. Like if it's an OKC Thunder, I think their switching defense could really be helpful in that case. But at the same time, it's like, who are you going to be able to play? So in terms of at the 5. So I don't know. There's a lot to consider, and I think it's just it's a game of matchups. But in terms of your kind of point about how they match up with the Nuggets and what I was saying about how they match up with the Clippers, I think almost any team in the West should really be concerned if they're going up against the New Orleans Pelicans. It's not going to be an easy series no matter who they play. So yeah, I think it's a great point.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with you, and you were agreeing with me, so I guess I couldn't agree more with myself. So that was well heard by me and well spoken before it was well heard by you.
By both and well heard by both, I will say. But yeah, any last thoughts on the Pelicans before we wrap up the pod?
I have a last thought in general, but not on the Pelicans.
What you got? Yeah, what you got?
Derek Jeter also won the Hank Aaron Award and the Gold Glove in 2006. Twice the voters voted him best hitter in the league and best fielder at shortstop, and he didn't win MVP either time.
What? Who won the other time?
2006. Who won the 2006 AL MVP?
Yeah, this is something you're supposed to just know, like off memory.
I do
right?
know. It's who won the 2006 AL MVP. So the Yankees lost to the Tigers in the ALDS on that side of the bracket. And then the Tigers beat the A's. The A's beat the Twins. Oh, Joe Mauer won MVP that year. So Mauer was awesome too, by the way.
Wait, you said Mauer for the two. So who won the other one?
Justin Morneau.
Oh, Morneau won.
So he got by Twins both times.
Yeah, that's crazy.
It's fucking bullshit, man.
2 JM Twins. That's crazy, man. That's really unfortunate.
But at least Mauer was actually super valuable. Not hating on Morneau, but
no, Mauer was really freaking good. And I could see, like, if there was one position more valuable than shortstop in terms of the defensive end, it's catcher. So you could maybe that one makes more sense than the Morneau one. I don't think you could justify it.
You can't justify the Morneau one. But even if Mauer's a better fielding catcher than they thought, of course he was a better fielding catcher than Jeter was at shortstop, actually.
Yeah,
but they voted him Gold Glove. So clearly they were high on his defense. Yeah. Even if they were like, yeah, we gave Mauer and Jeter both the Gold Glove, but clearly Mauer was more valuable as a defender. Was it enough to make up for the fact that they thought Jeter was the best hitter in the league?
Yeah.
I don't think it was.
It definitely wasn't, and this is amazing. I think I think what we need to do is go back through the history books and just find instances like this where just like wild things are happening, where the decisions are internally inconsistent, not like with our prism of like, oh, right, these things aren't as valuable. And we know now in 2023, it's like, no, at the time that was totally illogical, the decision that you made.
Right. Like we could do this for the NBA too. Like go back and look at defensive player of the year voting. Yeah. And then align that with like all NBA voting or something, or even MVP voting. Like imagine if there was a year where, cause who's someone like, I bet Kobe, there's a good one. I bet because Kobe was always voted for those all defense teams, even after he stopped playing defense. I bet there was a year where like Kobe led the league in scoring and was first team all defense, and then like didn't make the top 3 in MVP. Like they were
it's completely crazy. Yeah.
So one of those doesn't make sense.
One of those doesn't make sense. But what does make sense is listening to the Hot Hand Theory podcast. Thank you for joining us on the pod. Really appreciate it. If there's any New Orleans Pelicans fans listening to this, we talk about all 32 NBA teams and we kind of break things down the way that we did, bouncing back and forth from the film to the analytics to the data to every other aspect of the teams. And we watch a ton of basketball. Geoff watches more basketball than anybody else I know on the planet, like literally. And I watch a ton of basketball and we just love the game and love breaking it down. So love talking it and love talking and covering all the teams. So we're not just a Knicks podcast. We talk all NBA teams and we're here to do that. So
speaking of our love of the NBA, XJ, I have terrible news for you for a team not related to the Pelicans.
Oh gosh,
you were right. Dean Wade has been hurt. That's why he's been getting DNPs, and they were just announced that he's out without a timetable for return.
Oh my, that sucks for the Cavs for sure. I mean, I think Dean Wade is
really good for the Knicks that the Cavs will be without their defensive stopper, Dean Wade.
Dean Wade, underrated wing defender, Dean Wade, and has consistently been, at least in terms of impact and, you know, when you watch him play, a really good defensive player. So unfortunate news for the Cavs, but thank you for joining us. And this has been Hot Hand Theory.